So, those Photoshop Extended users out there have probably noticed that the new version of Photoshop has a lot of cool features for working with 3D models. This is great if you're an animator or doing modeling, architectural design, all sorts of things. And they've really extended the toolset. It first came out with Photoshop CS3 Extended, but CS4 builds upon those strengths and adds some very popular features. Let's take a look at some of the things we can do with 3D layers, even if we're not working in an animation world. So I've opened up a model here, and this model has a texture on it. For those of you at home who aren't quite sure, yes, we are indeed looking at a bug. And you see it has a texture and a model to it. And we can rotate this object. If we just click here, we actually get the ability to use the 3D rotate tool, and we can rotate the object and look at it from different angles. Now, every 3D model generally comes with a texture or more that's used to actually modify the object. And you can always double click here to actually open up that texture, and this hasn't changed. If you look closely here, you'll see the subtle textures for the bug. Now, one of the ways that you could use this is to actually modify the textures. I'll often get textures from a website called Texture King, so we can go ahead and flip over there now. It's just textureking.com. You'll see they have all sorts of free textures that you can use on your objects. Now, I've already downloaded one, some Rust, and I've got it right here. Let's go ahead and select that, and we'll choose Copy and switch back to our texture layer. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in and transform it so it actually fits over the abdomen of the bug. Let's just scale that down, rotate it, and drop it into position. And what we need to do now is mask it. Now, I'm just going to flip over to Channels, grab the blue channel here and duplicate it, and press Command L for levels. Notice as we adjust the levels, we get a nice, clean selection for that texture. We can now Command or Control click on that to load it, throw it away, and just come back to the layer. With the texture layer selected, click the Add Layer Mask button, and it masks it to that shape. Go ahead and just paint with black to hide a little bit here so it doesn't spill outside of that shape, and you get the idea. You can go through and remap textures as you want to. When we close that and save it, it saves it as a layered file, and you'll see here, when we switch back to the model, that it actually updates. And notice that that texture has been applied to the bug. So we've been able to update that texture on the back of the bug. Now obviously you'd want to do the rest of the model, and you can always double click here and take advantage of things like blending modes. We could set that to multiply or to something like screen and have it brighten that, lower the opacity a little bit, and you get the idea. Now that's the same as Photoshop CS3. What's really cool here in CS4 is that you can actually go further and use your painting tools, so you could paint right on the model. You can grab the paintbrush and we could sample a color here, and then just paint right on the model, and you see that it's changing colors. So that worked very well. Let's go ahead with a slightly brighter color. You could see it even better. There we go. And as we paint here, you see how the model updates. So that works very well if you want to make a direct modification on the image. You can also go as far as using tools like Clone. So I could sample here the texture from the back of the bug and come up top here and clone it in on the rest. And you see that it actually updates and it does a nice job of sampling that texture. So you can use that and build it up as you see fit. So overall, quite a bit of flexibility as you're building your models and textures, and you're going to want to check that out. Now you're saying, that's great, I'd like to start to use some 3D models in my Photoshop designs, but where do I get them? Well, there's lots of places to buy 3D models, but Photoshop has built in a browser we could find a bunch of free ones. It's pretty cool. So if you want to actually get some content, you'll be able to click on the 3D menu and choose Browse 3D Content Online. And that's going to work great. It's going to take you to a website that's going to be opening up soon with lots of 3D content, both free content and some content you could purchase. You can also take a look over at Google, where they have their 3D image warehouse, and all those Google models can come in too. So that's going to really open up things for you. Even if you're doing traditional motion graphic design or broadcast design, you'll actually be able to use these objects and bring them into Photoshop. Plus, for those motion graphic designers out there, you'll be glad to know that these 3D objects can come into After Effects now, and when you bring in a 3D object through Photoshop, then import it into After Effects, it actually comes in as a 3D model that can interact with the After Effects camera. So, you kind of got a back door to getting true 3D into After Effects with no third-party plugins, which is great news for design. Now, what else can you do with these 3D layers? Well, there's some cool things. We could take regular shape layers and turn them into three-dimensional layers. Let's see how. So, I'm going to go ahead here to a photo, and this is just a photo of a mural that I took. Now, this image, we want to wrap it to a surface. There's lots of cool things we could do. First off, we could simply choose 3D, New 3D Postcard from Layer. And when you do that, you essentially get a 3D transform functionality. This is a lot like the free transform ability, except you can now rotate it in three-dimensional space. So if you're creating backdrops for maybe a chroma key shot for a portrait, and you want to put a little dimensionality in it, or you're doing a mock-up for a set design or a product prototype, you now have 3D rotation inside of Photoshop, which is a great design option. We go ahead here and click, and you'll notice that we can actually rotate along all of our axes. So this gives us the ability to go along all the different axes and position this in three-dimensional space. Besides rotation, you can also come up here and move the object. So you'll see you have the ability to drag the 3D object, which lets you just reposition it, or actually use this tool here, which will let you slide it. And you could push this further away or closer to the camera. So this is a great design tool. It's going to give you a lot of flexibility for positioning layers in a true 3D environment. And that comes in handy as you're building composited images. Now, these 3D functionality is only built into the extended version of Photoshop, but if you're working with a lot of the different suites out there, like Production Premium or the Master Collection, that's the version of Photoshop you have. Let's see one more cool thing we could do for product prototyping using a texture. Now, I'm going to switch over to that same texture again, and we're going to prepare this texture to use on a 3D object. To do that, we're going to make a seamless texture using two simple techniques. First off, we're going to crop this texture layer. So let's go ahead and crop, and what I'm looking for here is a straight line. You'll notice that's just a little bit off, so I'll just rotate the crop tool there just slightly and adjust that. And what we have here is a good straight line that we can use for the object. So when we crop it, the image is now straight. What we're going to do now is make this into a seamless texture using the Auto Blend command, which is part of CS4. Here's how we do it. First off, let's make this a layer by double-clicking, and we'll just call it Wall. I'm now going to go ahead and split this in half. We'll take our marquee tool and lasso along this edge here, and I'll press Shift-Command-J or Shift-Control-J, which essentially jumps that to a new layer. Notice that it's cut to a new layer. Easy enough, we'll grab this wall layer and just pull this down to the edge. And now take this part and move it down here to the right. Now, we'll position it about where we think it goes. That seems to be pretty good there, but notice it's not blended together. Easy enough. Shift-click to select both layers and choose Edit, Auto Blend Layers. And tell it it's a panorama image. Now, this isn't a true panoramic photo, but we want to blend the left edge with the right edge of the picture. This works really well. Click OK, tell it to do seamless tones and colors, and after a little bit of thinking, notice how it blended that together, giving us a nice seamless edge. Now, you can see that edge there manually, and you can always touch that up, but that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go ahead and merge those layers, and Command-click to load that, Control-click on a PC, and we'll just say Image Crop. That crops it, worked just fine. Now, Photoshop CS4 Extended also includes several 3D primitives, basic shapes that you can use as objects within your Photoshop composition. To access these, we just choose 3D, New Shape from Layer. And we can do things like soda can. And you'll see that this texture is actually mapped to the can. If we call up the 3D panel here, you'll see we have lights. Let's go to the light panel, and we're just going to click right here to move the light next to the camera. We can adjust the intensity of the light, as we need to and play with that. We can even select multiple lights and see that they could have different colors. And that's a useful way to change the look. Now, what's nice here is that this can be rotated. So you simply grab your rotation tool over here. We have our orbit tool for the camera, or better yet, just the 3D rotate tool. And you could rotate this object around as you see fit. And that gives you some pretty cool objects. Let's just make a new empty layer real quick. I'll fill that with a color. And if we choose 3D, new shape from layer, you'll see we have things like hats, pyramids, rings, etc. You could choose a pyramid, for example, and it's going to map different textures to each side. So you could then replace the sides of those with different photos or textures. Simply select a texture, and if you have it there, you can actually modify it. A quick click on it, you see it there. Easy to make a change. So, lots of cool stuff to do. New 3D tools inside of Photoshop Extended. You're going to want to check them out. Remember, everything can be found under the 3D menu, and there's quite a bit there. If you're a 3D artist, you're going to want to explore a lot of the features here because they've really gone a lot further to add powerful 3D tools and painting inside of Photoshop CS4 Extended. So, if you actually have access to Adobe After Effects, you can use these Photoshop 3D layers inside them, and all the 3D functionality is preserved. Here's how you do it. Now, in After Effects, you can create great things like motion graphics, DVD menus, things for the web. You're just going to go ahead and double-click in the project area and navigate to a Photoshop document that contains a 3D file. Go ahead and bring that in as a composition so all the layers come in, and click Open. In the box, make sure you have Live Photoshop 3D checked and click OK. When you do that, a new composition comes over, and you'll see that we have a camera, the object, and a layer that is called the controller layer. This is the layer that you use to actually rotate the object around to orient it towards the camera as you want. So if we go ahead here and actually twirl that down, you'll see there's transform, and we could do things like scale this object. Let's go ahead and change the background color so it's easier to see. We'll make that white. There we go. And we can actually rotate this object as needed, positioning it as we want. There we go. So a lot of flexibility. Plus, if you were designed using 3D cameras inside of After Effects, you can fully animate your camera and have it interact with the object. Simply grabbing the camera controls here, you see we could do things like adjust zoom and actually zoom in on an object. And it's nice and responsive. Plus, we can even play with things like the camera angle, tweaking the point of interest if we want to move things around. Or let's make subtle adjustments here to orientation, and you see how we can move past the object. So for example, I can quickly add a keyframe, go to the 4-second mark here, and adjust my orientation, panning past, and let's just go ahead and preview that. And you see it actually does an animated pan past the 3-dimensional object, and it's not just simply sliding that object down, it's actually tilting the camera over it. So, After Effects and all its 3D camera system has a lot of functionality, well beyond what we can cover here today, but the cool thing is for you After Effects power users out there, you now have the ability to import 3D objects directly from Photoshop, and they will interact with your 3D cameras and are absolutely 100% editable. Remember, simply bring that object in, and as you choose it and bring it in as a composition, make sure you leave that option checked for Live Photoshop 3D. That's it for this episode of Photoshop CS4 Sneak Peek. I'm your host, Rich Harrington. We've got a lot of cool things that you can check out over at our website at cs4.com. That's CSFOUR.com. We've got a great contest going with prizes that you can win, as well as all of the other episodes in the training series. So be sure to check that out. If you'd like to learn more about Photoshop on a regular basis, we have some ongoing podcast series you might be interested in. The first is called Understanding Adobe Photoshop. You can find out about it at rastervector.com. It's for general interest Photoshop enthusiasts, digital photographers, graphic designers, web folks. As far as those of you working in video and motion graphics, you're going to want to check out our other series, Photoshop for Video, and its blog at photoshopforvideo.com. So, I hope you enjoyed it. This is Rich Harrington, and tune into our other episodes. Thanks.